Alleluia, 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 Hallelujah.
The heavens were opened and a voice was heard. This is my only begotten. Listen.
Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
May Christ be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Good News according to the book of Matthew.
Glory to you, O Christ.
Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John. John tried to dissuade Jesus, saying, I should be baptized by you, and yet you come to me? But Jesus replied, leave it this way for now. We must do this to completely fulfill God's justice. So John reluctantly agreed. Immediately after Jesus had been baptized and was coming up out of the water, the sky suddenly opened up, and Jesus saw the Spirit of God descending as a dove and hovering over him. With that, a voice from the heavens said, this is my own, my beloved, on whom my favor rests. This is the gospel of Christ.
Praise to you, Jesus Christ.
When I look at Epiphany, I'm kind of reminded of Calvin and Hobbes. The days are just packed. There's so very much that's so very important going on in this season that's just chock full of epiphanies. And the church calendar tries to fit it all in. We've gone from the Advent season waiting for the event of the advent of Christ among us as an infant. On Christmas, we heard about him greeted by shepherds. Last Sunday, we celebrated the Holy Family. And in year A, the story skips right past the Magi visiting them to Joseph's dreams and the journey to and from Egypt. I hope Emmaus recapped that missing part. I know that we did at ROC, because it's a really cool story. And really, from the time of Christ's birth as a human and as God, that's the first epiphany, the first showing forth. The angels and the shepherds are arguably 2 and 3. The Magi come, and remember, that's 2 years later. First to Herod, then to Jesus, then back to Herod, and only then get told, well, let's dodge out of there. Let's go home a different way. Get out of the way of the horror of Herod's plan. And then Joseph is awakened in the middle of the night and runs for Egypt with Mary and Jesus. In fact, Joseph has 4 dreams as it goes along there, including that guidance dream to no, hang in there before Jesus was born. These are showing forth too. This is God declaring his plan there too. And then we skip a whole lot more time. Though it's arguable that Jesus ditching the caravan home to talk with the teachers in the temple at the tender age of 12 was probably also an epiphany, but it doesn't make the list. Our official big epiphanies are the Magi coming, Jesus' baptism, and Jesus' first miracle at the wedding at Cana. And this year, cycle A, the readings kind of skip past the Magi and Cana. They focus in on John and Jesus. And that's okay. The beauty of our rotating cycles means that we get to different ways to look at the stories that we tell about Christ. And this time we look at the start of his ministry with him getting baptized, as we'll talk about today. And then later on, John telling his disciples to go follow Jesus, that we'll talk about next Sunday. And then the wedding happens shortly after that second piece off screen. This month, it's about relationships among these called peoples, especially John and his cousin Jesus. So let's look at it. Mary and Elizabeth, remember, met when they were both pregnant. Mary ran to Elizabeth to go say, and John in Elizabeth's womb leapt to receive Jesus. Their relationship started there. They're only a few months apart in age. I'm comfortable betting that Mary continued to seek Elizabeth's counsel. She was older, she was wiser, at least when they weren't in Egypt. And I'm betting that the boys knew each other fairly well. Anybody else have that perfect cousin who could do no wrong that you were always compared to? I kind of feel for John. I'm just saying, it's got to be hard having Jesus as your cousin. Now, John was special. Remember, he was promised as a Nazarite. He was out there, rough clothes, rough living, vegan, the whole 9 yards. But his job was to be completely human, even if he did fulfill Elijah's role. So it's no surprise that when John's out in his element, he's preaching, he's baptizing, and here comes the perfect cousin. He just shows up and he wants to participate in John's all too mortal ministry. And John's like, you should be baptizing me, not the other way around. This isn't right. And Jesus has to remind his cousin that, yeah, but there's also the human part. And there's the fulfilling my role as a member of my Jewish community part. Jesus says, leave it this way for now. We must do this to completely fulfill God's righteousness. Because Jesus needed to step through the entirety of the human side of the story in order to legitimize the God side to us, for us. And John, though it says reluctantly, agreed. So this is the part that I want to draw your attention to in the gospel. There were other reformers baptizing people. Baptizer cults were all over the place. But none of the rest of them were Elijah come again. That role was still the very human coming of the young person who grew up aware of, and in the reflected light and long shadow of, his perfect cousin. And these weeks will see John struggle with his humanity and his cousin's calling, and what that means for his own calling. So this week we see John floored that Jesus is coming to him to be baptized, tries to talk him out of it. He sees it as inappropriate, unnecessary, the reverse of what he thinks should happen. And Jesus' reply gives him space to be correct about that. He doesn't contradict his cousin. He says, no, just let it be this way. We need to fulfill this righteousness. And John hears what he's saying. He stops arguing, permits him, and from the later verses, he goes all in, not just going through the motions, not being uncomfortable, but stepping into the water with his cousin and ministering to him. Which leads to the huge epiphany here, God's very public declaration, this is my son. Sometimes our new awarenesses or epiphanies come subtly, some not. Bishop Peter was talking recently about when he was first asked whether he'd ordain women priests, and saying he didn't know, but he obviously needed to think about it. He got an epiphany. Mary had a few things to say to him, and within a decade, he was ordaining women. It wasn't a mountaintop, but it certainly got his attention, courtesy of a, blunt Mother Mary. And I want us to think about our own epiphanies and our own wrestling with what we see of glory and what we feel of our feet that are still very much in the sand. Think about those epiphanies, big and small, and how they've moved and affected you. And I'm hoping you might be willing to share one.